Hey all. So I want to talk a little bit about the Industrial Revolution and what it means for where we are today, and if that has anything to do with social theory that we're studying. So when you well, let me start with this. One of the things that I think is absolutely amazing or fascinating or weird or whatever is how much of our world, the world that we live in and understand, how much of it is like 100 years old tops. Humans have been around for something like 200,000 years. There are human remains here in this region that go back 17,000 years. There have been hundreds of civilizations. Humans have been, in Europe at least for 40,000 plus years. So we have a long human history. But the world that I live in is one of computers and cell phones and GPS and weather updates, um, cars, planes, rocket ships. This world is only something like 100 years old, and that's uh, and it's hard to try and imagine going backwards when you go look at some of the preppers and collapsniks on the internet. They're spending all this time and energy trying to imagine what rolling back this technologic society we have, what that would look like. Okay, so when you and all of this, really the inflection point was the Industrial Revolution. I mean, we talked about the Enlightenment in Europe. We talked a little bit about the Western expansion of Europe, and those were important certainly, and they laid the foundation for what was going to eventually be the um, when I get notifications from work, they pop up on my cell phone there, and what was eventually going to be um, the world we live in. But that took hundreds of years. So if you really want to like zero in on what makes this world, our world, what it is, it for me it has to come down to power. Um, if I want to go buy 1,000 calories of Chick-fil-A sandwich and fries, um, I'll leave my air-conditioned house and hop into uh, my Jeep there, which gets just atrocious mileage. Um, and I'll drive to the Chick-fil-A, which is a 15-20 minute drive. Um, and I'll burn a couple thousand calories of petroleum on the way there. I'll get there, and Chick-fil-A is this huge enterprise that's air conditioned, well lit. Both of those are run on power. The chicken is mass farmed in enormous uh, chicken facilities and then butchered in different chicken facilities, flash frozen, and delivered to wherever it's going to get cooked and eaten. And what do we feed the chickens? We feed the chickens, uh, we feed them corn, which is itself uh, farmed using enormous tractors, enormous combines, both of which are running on diesel and fertilized with fertilizer, which is some fertilizer is actually um, a fossil fuel. Some of it's made off of natural gas, and some of it's potash that comes from other parts of the world that has to be shipped here. So just to go get that, 1,000 calories of chicken dinner, I'm burning a tremendous amount of calories to create that 1,000 calories. It's not very efficient, or at least it's not really efficient from a power perspective. If you go back uh, more than a couple hundred years. I mean, even if you go back 100 years, but let's go back a couple hundred years. The chicken may have come from the backyard and was eating bugs and kitchen scraps. So the chicken that I needed to make a 1,000 calorie chicken salad sandwich was a net energy gain on the environment for me, instead of a net energy loss through the use of fossil fuels and everything. When you get to so as a date to think about some of these things, part of, well, we talked about Marx is writing 1800 1850 about the Communist Manifesto and people moving to the cities. You had at that time some use of fossil fuels. Mostly would have been coal, as was the most likely one, and that coal was mostly used for heating, but then also for furnaces and such, because they were using it to make steel and metal. But if we go to Europe, not Europe, Great Britain, they had a problem insofar as they had dug down in their coal mines to a point where they were having trouble keeping the groundwater out. And before we had this kind of power, the way you would pump the water out would be with horses on a turnstile. And in fact, the very first, well, no, that's a different thing. Horses or oxen on a turnstile driving the pump, and that would pump the water out. But at a certain depth, you couldn't get the horses to go fast enough to keep the water out. And so Great Britain was about ready to bump into something of an energy shortage. And that's when the very first steam engine, effective steam engine, was invented and used to pump out the coal mines. So the first steam engine, the Newcomen steam engine, used coal to drive the steam engine, and that allowed them to get more coal. So they were able to access more energy, and that worked. The next important thing for the next important step, and probably the most important step for the Industrial Revolution as we understand it, was, I would say, in Pennsylvania, you had, his name was Colonel Drake, and he hit the first big oil well that we would understand today. There were oil seeps, and people used oil for stuff like trying to waterproof boats and stuff, but it wasn't used largely. Well, he uses a steam engine drill to drill down, gets the oil, and that's I want to say 1859 or 1860, something like that. And within 50 years, you've got 1910, you've got a burgeoning auto industry that's running on petroleum fuels, gasoline, diesel. There were few electric cars way back when, but I don't know that we need to worry about that. And so why is this important? Well, when you start thinking about, well, actually, that access to power explains a lot of the modern world, and it's kind of a rabbit hole you can go down into. If you want to think about American military might, your ability to project power from a military perspective is only as good as your access to fuel, right? F-35s don't fly themselves, and they certainly don't, they certainly don't fly on solar. They fly on jet fuel, and jet fuel is highly processed petroleum. Modern shipping from China, international global trade, you know, doesn't, I mean, you can run a sailboat, but that's not the way ours works. Those ginormous shipping container ships run on lowly refined petroleum. The Middle East is a mess, not because anyone. The Middle East is a mess because of their resources. Why our world powers caring what's happening to a handful of sparsely populated desert tribes? Well, because they have the most power in the world. And going back to that military question, even if you didn't want to use it yourself, it's not something you would want to fall into the hands of your adversaries, right? So power in modern society is definitely a rabbit hole you can go down, and because before you had access to those fossil fuels and the things that you can do with them, you didn't have really much in the way of mechanized factories. And what you did have ran off of, and I think I talked about this last time, either dams and water wheels, or the Dutch reclaimed all their land with windmills. Those were your options. It was wind, it was animal power, it was slave power, it was water power, and you could only do so much with any of those things. And just about every civilization you want to think of had some access to one of those things in order to build its power base. And for us, for 150 years, it's been fossil fuels, and specifically, although not only, petroleum, because of its flexibility, because of how much power it has. I believe a gallon of gas has something like 30,000 calories of energy in it, which is about 30 Chick-fil-A sandwiches. I guess that would be big Chick-fil-A sandwiches, but you get the idea. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep my work computer from going to sleep. So when we don't have to, well, like Roman civilization was extensively based on heavy use of slaves, and we live in a world that just isn't. We have energy. We use energy, power, to do all the things that in the past you would have had to have had something like slaves or animals or whatever to do. Just think about some TV show about the Romans that we were watching, and the upper class woman is getting driven around town in her caravan, whatever the right word for it is, and it's got four guys that are carrying, there is a word for this, it's just escaping me, carrying her little thing she's sitting in, and that's how she gets around. And only the most richest people could have afforded to own a caravan and then have people whose job it was to carry them around in it. And we all have cars, and which is not something, even in ye olden days, you think of like Western movies and stuff, and people are riding around on horses. You would have had to have been fairly well-to-do to even have a horse, and the reason old-fashioned parts of town are also tight is because they were walkable. Right here in Macon, you could live up on College Hill and in a 15-minute walk be downtown to where your work was. or if you weren't rich enough to live on College Hills, you lived in one of those other neighborhoods around there, and everything would have been a 15-20 minute walk. And that's just not the way we live anymore. Why? Because of power. So with all that power comes the, I don't want to say leisure, because it's not like we all get to sit around and do nothing, but we don't have to sit around, we don't have to farm, carry other people around in their caravans. We do other jobs, like work for software companies or work at universities. And you wouldn't have had something like sociology, psychology, anthropology, which we're going to talk a little bit about in one of the videos near here, if you didn't have people freed from the very basic necessities of life to think about those things. Otherwise, without all of that power, setting civilization free, or the people in civilization free, you would not, you'd be right back to the first couple of lectures in the course. You would have had a handful of religious thinkers, a handful of very well-to-do people who didn't have to work, who would be educated, and they'd be the ones, thinking about the nature of society. You wouldn't have an explosion of writing and research in the social sciences that represents, everything since like the 1900s. Marx, like I said, was 1800, 1850. He is a little bit ahead of the others, but we'll talk about Durkheim and Weber, and they're both right around the turn of the 1900s, so that'll be good. And then from there, everything just explodes outwards. And so there we go. Without the energy that fossil fuels allows us, that then got applied to manufacturing to create all the factories that drove the Industrial Revolution, and then got applied to farming and forestry and fishing and shipping and everything else, we'd all have we'd have a much less highly differentiated society. Our jobs would be much, there'd be fewer different jobs for us all to have, and we wouldn't be having this conversation right now over a cell phone and an online class about, the basic nature of society. So there we go. This week's readings and videos are going to be about this, the Industrial Revolution. We're going to talk about sociology, psychology, anthropology, economics, all of the different social sciences that start to differentiate and spring off into their own disciplines. Starting the 1800s and 1900s, and after this session, we'll start talking about Marx, Durkheim, and Weber, and what comes after. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.